Welcome to Practical Leadership on the Daily Parks and Rec Show, hosted by Justin Cutler. Join us every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Get ready for real-world leadership insights, practical strategies, and inspiring lessons designed to help you build stronger teams, lead with confidence, and turn ideas into results. Practical Leadership, where great leaders turn challenges into opportunities. In this episode, discover how to lead through transitions by asking the right questions, building trust, and setting your team up for success.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Practical Leadership. I'm your host, Justin Cutler, and today we'll be talking about leadership transitions. How do you manage yourself and your team for long-term success and results? Last week, I introduced myself, and you may have picked up on the multiple places and cities I've worked for and the agencies I use this framework to support my success, build a successful team, and deliver results for communities I was working for. But every leadership transition begins with questions and not answers. And you may be tempted as a new leader to dive right in with all the right answers and just telling everybody everything that you know. And it's really easy to do that. But I'm going to caution you, and we'll talk about why later. But before we dive in, I'll give you 5 questions real quick, and then we'll hear from our sponsors here in a second. Question number 1, what is going on? You need to diagnose before you decide. Question 2, what matters most? You can't focus on everything, so you got to focus on a few priorities that create the greatest impact. Question 3, who matters most? Leadership is built one relation at a time, and in local government, sometimes there's multiple relationships you have to manage, from council to the mayor, to your supervisor, to your team. There's up to the neighbors, to stakeholders, to volunteers. There are so many people you have to be aware of. And then what will success look like? You have to align expectations before measuring results. And then lastly, how will I lead? How will you show up? Your daily behavior defines your leadership more than your title. So if you're watching this later on YouTube, or today you're watching it live on Facebook or LinkedIn, please make sure you go on and like and subscribe to the Daily Parks and Recreation channel to help us spread the word about leadership, parks and recreation, and local government. You can do this right on YouTube today. Make sure you tune in tomorrow at 12 p.m., 9 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific for the Daily Parks and Recreation show hosted by our very own, the doorman, Craig LeBlanc. Now, before we dive deep, let's hear a word from today's sponsors.
Not every mission happens behind a desk. Some happen in the places where our freedom is defended. This is the front line, where service meets reality, readiness requires resilience, and impact is measured in people, not headlines. We talk with the men and women who support our military communities, the leaders, responders, and recreation professionals who create spaces where service members and their families can recharge, connect, and stay strong. From fitness and recreation to community programs that strengthen the total force at home and abroad, we share the stories, the challenges, and the purpose that keeps them going. Welcome to On the Front Line, the Military Rec Show, hosted by John Prue. Real people, real stories, real service. This is where it begins.
Well, great. Welcome back to the Practical Leadership. I'm your host, Justin Cutler. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're talking about leadership transitions. So, as I shared at the top of the hour, I've transitioned a number of times from different size agencies. And so kind of have a lot of experience with this topic, and I'm really excited to share this with you today. I think there's a lot of tips and tricks you'll be able to glean from today's conversation. So let's dive in. So first, one of the transitions that are kind of a couple transitions that were really memorable for me was one with Atlanta Parks and Recreation. I was coming on board as the commissioner of Parks and Recreation, and the prior commissioner left that Friday, and I was coming in the next Monday. And it was great to be a part of the Dickens administration. And when I got there, I was greeted warmly by the receptionist in the mayor's office, and she kind of gave me a beautiful pen and handed me a notebook and just kind of got me settled. Then I met with the deputy chief of staff or chief operating officer, and then I was shuttled over to get my badge and do all that. But one of the things that struck me is when I walked in with the team, really, I was walking into a staff meeting and the team was there and they did a great job, and they handed me a notebook and said, "Okay, let's get it done." Right. And then my supervisor, the deputy chief operating officer, left the room and it was go time. And I think a lot of times when you get to kind of higher level positions, you'll be in a position where you're expected to know what you're doing. Right. And you have to have a plan. And I think if there's anything that you get from today, it's you have to manage yourself. There'll be a lot of times where you expect there to be kind of a roadmap, but at the end of the day, you're a Parks and Recreation professional. You have to manage yourself. You have to know what you need to get done. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about what do you need to know the first day. And really it starts maybe a couple days prior you walk into a new position. So you're really excited for this job. You know that maybe you're putting some pressure on yourself or other people are. There's some uncertainty. There's high expectations, and you're suddenly the leader. And everyone assumes you have the answers. But what if your greatest strength isn't having the answers? What if it's asking better questions? And that's what we're having. That's what we're going to talk about today. And that's why it's critical that you have a plan. Similarly, one of the first things that happened to me when I was in La Pine Parks and Recreation District, I was the very first paid staff member. So a board of directors, Mr. Tony DeBone, a great guy. He was the first person I met, and he welcomed me to the community. I actually came out a little early after I was selected as a candidate. They had a big welcome party before I moved there. It was great to meet people in La Pine, build those relationships. But that was the first staff member. So there wasn't an HR department. There wasn't anybody I could really go to, but Tony and his wife, Kathy, did a phenomenal job just introducing me to people in the community, helping me build those relationships. But again, I was alone. There wasn't a guide. There wasn't HR saying, "Hey, here's what you do." There wasn't kind of a supervisor that was real hands-on telling me what to do and where to do it. And I think, again, that's why it's really important that you have a plan. So that's where having a plan and leading through transition comes into play. You have to be ready. You have to set the tone day one, and you have to be ready to go. And so what I did, and both in La Pine and Atlanta, we'll talk through a little bit more in detail later, but I developed, a series of questions. Prior to even coming on board, I had sent some questions out to the team saying, "Hey, these are the questions that I'm going to have when I come and I start day one." And I did this in Seattle where I had a little bit more room to start. And what I did is I sent out a couple emails before I was even there at the encouragement of Christopher Williams, the acting superintendent at the time. He said, "The team wants to get to know you. They want to hear from you. They're really excited. And it's important that you get off on a right foot." So I sent a couple emails just introducing myself, telling them a little bit about myself. Also telling them the questions that were going to be on my mind. Again, you want to start with questions. And so that kind of created an expectation, right? That I was entering the organization, I was going to talk, and I was going to learn first and foremost. And so that really set up just the tone and the tenor of what we're going to accomplish as a team in the first 90 days. Because really you have about 90 days to kind of build those relationships and get off on the right foot. So let's talk a little bit about why leadership transitions fail. So most leaders, when they come into an organization, they'll fail because instead of thinking about this in terms of questions and appreciative inquiry or about a way of diagnosing kind of what's going on, they're acting before they understand. They're acting out of ignorance, not intentional, but they're acting because they maybe assume things. They may be biased towards a certain perspective. Maybe they had heard things about a park and recreation agency prior to coming on board. I know one of the challenges I had in a community was the person that my supervisor just said, you don't have time to do all of these meetings. I said, well, it's actually really important that I do these meetings, because if I don't do these meetings, I may make a mistake. Fortunately, I carved out enough time and I was able to get through meet with every team member and every work group. And it was really helpful for me to understand that. And I know that if I didn't do that, I would have stepped in some stuff along the way. You may be solving the wrong problems too. If you don't diagnose and understand what's going on in an organization, you may be thinking that you need to go left, but really you need to go right. And it's really important that you understand what's going on in an organization. That's where questions come in. Also, you may mistake urgency for importance. Reflecting back on my tenure in Atlanta, I think one of the things that I was struck with when I first got to Atlanta is there was a homicide in a park, day 2 on the job. So I just got into Atlanta late Tuesday. I started on Monday, late Tuesday evening. There was a homicide, and gun violence was really important. Reducing gun violence is really important to our mayor and continues to be. And so I immediately got the team together. We talked about gun violence, and this was something that had happened for, a long time in Atlanta. It wasn't anything new to the staff. And, I kind of took a little bit of that just attitude about gun violence as just complacency, but it wasn't. Like, I think the team understood that this happens, unfortunately, on a frequent basis in some of our parks across America where there's gun violence. And we can't overcorrect or overreact in those situations, but you have to address it. And so, we put together some different ideas about what we could do to address gun violence in our parks. We had a thing called Popsicles in the Park, was just to take back space, build relationships. We also established a ranger program. We increased our video cameras. But we were able to do that because we understood that gun violence was important to our mayor, safety in our parks was important to our community, and we had the support of our neighbors to really move those things forward. So it was really easy to act on that because we understood what the challenge was, and it was kind of in our face. It was in my face day 2. And it quickly built a relationship with the police chief, which was an amazing thing. Sometimes crisis can have different results, right? And from that crisis, I just had a great relationship with the chief of police, and it really helped me and helped us respond to these crises going forward. But I also had a plan, right? And I knew that I needed to keep interviewing people. So I wasn't distracted, right, with that urgency of gun violence, but I was understood that I needed to continue to execute on diagnosing and understanding what was going on. So you have to build plans before building trust, right? So you have to build trust before building plans. So you need to build those relationships. You can't assume that, things are going to be easy in one city because they were in another. Don't fall into the trap of, you should trust me because I've done X, Y, Z, or because I'm the leader, right? That's an easy trap to fall into sometimes. And so it's really important that you build that trust before building plans. And also you have to recognize as a new leader, you're inheriting situations you did not create. Let me say that again. You're inheriting situations you did not create. And that's not your fault. That's not anybody's fault, really, at the end of the day. But your job as a leader is you have to pick it up and you have to address it. Our first responsibility isn't changing the organization. It's understanding the organization and the team. Because from understanding comes compassion, understanding comes care, and understanding really does come with understanding comes results. And it reminds me of a quote from St. Francis of Assisi that says, "Seek not to be understood, but to understand." And that's a quote that I've had on my wall for several years. And it really helped me be grounded in, do I understand the situation? Do I understand what's going on? And what assumptions am I making before acting? And so that was really critical in my pursuit in managing people. So those are the ways that leaders can fail. Acting before understanding, solving the wrong problems, mistaking urgency for importance. If somebody comes to you with, this is on fire, we have to do this, it may not be important. And then building trust before building plans before building trust. That's how leaders fail. So you want to do the opposite, right? You want to build trust and then build plans. And also recognizing that you inherited situations, and you have to take responsibility and move it forward. So to have a good transition, obviously, that's what we don't want to do. To have a good transition, these are the 5 questions you want to be asking yourself, really before you even start the opportunity, before you start your next role. You want to ask yourself, what is going on, right? What is going on? And we'll walk through these more in depth. You also want to ask yourself, what matters most? So what matters? What do you, need to get done? And then who matters, right? And this isn't a value judgment on a specific group of people. It's really understanding, who matters and who do you have to, and what does success look like? And those two kind of go together, right? Who matters and what does success look like to that person? And then how will I lead, right? Will you be, kind of ever present? Will you be out in the community? Will you be more reserved? What was the last leader like? Kind of understanding that situation. In one organization, the prior leader, this person just kind of had more of a laissez-faire leadership approach, and I chose to come. I wore a tie every day for a year, just to differentiate myself from this other leader, to set a level of professionalism. That's one of the things I saw in the organization, that they needed to elevate the level of professionalism. So I wore a tie to work every day for a year, just to say, hey, I'm a different leader. This is how I show up, and this is how we should show up as a team. So think about how you'll lead as well. So let's dive into the first question. What is going on? And this is arguably the most important question, right? Too many leaders assume they know what before they get into an organization. And Parks and Recreation, we're a small team, right? There's a lot of agencies, but man, it's a small world. And it's important that you don't assume based on a rumor or based on what you've heard or what you've seen at conferences. Like, you need to get your hands dirty, kind of build those relationships. But too many leaders assume they know. So instead, become a student, right? Discuss. You want to discuss what's going on with your team, discuss what's going on with different leaders, volunteers in the organization. They can be a great resource because they have the ear of the staff. Staff will come to them and may say, hey, I'm observing this, or I see this, or I need that. So volunteers can be a great source of information. You need to listen. What are you hearing in the community? What are you hearing from parents who are taking their kids to the programs? What are you hearing from, volunteer groups or friends groups that are helping to maintain the parks? What are you hearing from other communities that may be adjacent to your community? What's your reputation within the area? That all can be really good information. You need to read, maybe go back, read minutes from different meetings. If there's a park council, if there's a city council, read. And one of the great things is you can use, a lot of cities have their minutes online, or they can have it in audio format. You can watch it at 1.5 speed after you watch this show at home, right? Ask lots of questions, and we'll give you 5 questions here in a minute. But ask questions, and ask them of each team, and at all different levels. Don't just ask your managers, your first reports. If you're a multi-level organization, make sure you're asking the seasonal staff. What's their experience within the organization? What's the mid-manager's experience within the organization? And depending on the size of your organization, ask everybody. When I was in Seaside, I think we had a team of about 10, 15 full-time staff, and then another 20 to 30 part-time staff. I met with everybody. I blocked off time on my calendar. It's important that you get to know your team. It's important that you build those relationships. Some people hadn't even met with the executive director in the organization, and it was a great way for me to build that relationship with people. And so, take the time. It'll pay dividends in the end. But ask questions, listen, and watch meetings, and also watch relationships. Who's going to who. Oftentimes you'll start to notice patterns. This person, people tend to go to that person for this information. This person, they go to that person for this information. So watch, understand kind of what's going on. Also learn the culture, right? What are some of the cultural norms? How do they treat each other? How do they treat success? But also, how do they treat failure, right? Do they celebrate success? Do they, throw a little party? Do they give out certificates? How do people celebrate success? And then explore, what problems are visible, right? What problems are hidden? It can be easy when you're taking over a Parks and Recreation program. If you're going out to a park, or you're going out to community center, and you just see something that's broken, right? What are the problems that are visible? But also there's things that you aren't going to see. You aren't going to see the pool filter. You aren't going to see the water lines or the irrigation lines in the park or at a golf course. You aren't going to see some of those things. So you have to ask lots of questions. And who has influence? You want to understand who has influence. What do they have influence over? Sometimes it's not always the supervisor. It may be a subordinate staff member within a reporting chain that has more influence than the supervisor. So you need to understand, how that works. And then what decisions have already been made? Are there decisions that you're going to have to carry out in your organization beginning day one? Or what how much decision authority do you have? And then what assumptions are people making about you? I think you also need to ask yourself, what assumptions people are making about you. Now with social media, you have LinkedIn, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, and you can curate that pretty well. But at the end of the day, there's people out there who may be saying things about you or that you don't even know about. And I think it's really important that you understand what people may be seeing, what assumptions they may be making, and how that might impact your ability to get the job done. So some practical advice, schedule learning meetings beginning day one. These are not updates. These are not status reports. These are learning conversations. And ask everyone. These are the 5 questions that I used. I asked everybody, what is working well? What needs to improve? What do you hope I do? What are you concerned I will do? Do you have any advice for me? And this is really helpful for me. So it's what is working well? What needs to improve? What do you hope I do? What are you concerned I will do? And do you have any advice for me? And that last question really is the sweetest question because it opens the door for just anything to be said. And people will share anything. They'll tell you about their hobbies. They'll tell you about what they're passionate about, and you'll get to know your whole team. And it's a great way to understand what's going on. And I think it's really helped me in multiple organizations because people have often said, you're the first person to ask me these questions. You're the first person to really, come here and get to know me. And it means a lot to people. And the important thing is you're going to do this within the first 90 days that you're with your new organization or in your new role. But the challenge is you also need to do this maybe a year or 2 years down the road. You need to kind of go back out and talk to your team and understand what's going on. And you need to do it consistently, not just once or twice a year. Making sure that you're engaging your team on a real personal level because people enjoy that. People like, when they can see their leader out doing activities, especially in parks and recreation. We all work hard and it can be hard work. It can be hot work too in the summer, especially right now in July. It can be really hot out. I know it's hot in a lot of the country. So, just getting outside, bringing popsicles, getting to know your team is a great way to do that too. So let's move on to question 2. Question 2, what matters most? So in addition to understanding, what's going on in an organization, it's also important to understand what matters. And this kind of gets at culture too, right? It gets at, what is the mission? What is the vision? What are the values? Both what are the spoken values, meaning what are the values and the vision and the mission that are written down? But then what are the values that are hidden, right? And what is the culture? And this really gets at culture. And one of the other quotes I like is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you may have the best strategy in the world. You may have the most beautiful parks and recreation master plan. But if you don't have the right culture, right? If you don't have the right culture, you are not going to get that master plan done at all. And one of the things that I see, and I know a lot of people talk about this, is like, a lot of people have great plans, but they can't execute on those plans. And so it's really important that you get really good on executing and you understand what matters most. What are the political priorities? And there may be different political priorities in your organization. There may be the volunteers have some priorities. The council may have different priorities. The mayor may have different priorities. The city manager may have different priorities, right? And you need to understand what are the different priorities within your organization. What are the financial realities? How does that impact? What is your budget? What does the city charter say? What authority do you have? Where is employee morale? Where is your team at? Are they on an upswing? Are they doing really well? They're hitting it out of the park. They've just won a couple of awards. Or are they, feeling bummed? Was there an embezzlement issue? Was there a long-time employee that passed away? Was there a safety issue that occurred at your organization? What's the trust level like? So understanding what matters most within employee morale. And then asking, if I could only accomplish one thing this year, what would that thing be, right? And this can be a conversation you have with your supervisors. It can be a conversation you have with the council. It can be a conversation you have with the city manager. If I could only accomplish one thing this year, what would it be, right? And also discuss how leaders often confuse activity with progress, right? And so sometimes you'll have a leader that seems really busy, but are they delivering that results? Are they delivering this on the strategic plan that you're talking about? And without priorities, everything will become urgent. So you need to prioritize with your immediate supervisor in your new role. What is most important after, 30 days, what do you hope I accomplish? 60 days, 90 days, and then a year. What does success look like? That's what you're really trying to drill down on, is what matters most and what does success look like. And write down your top 5 priorities, right? Making sure that after you've interviewed your team, one of the things that I would do is I would take all of the notes. I would put it up on a piece of notebook paper, a big white piece of paper in my office, and I would just understand. I would kind of highlight, here are the things that I heard. Here are the things that I need to be working on. And then the other thing I would do is I would reference those things in meetings. So I would have, a staff meeting with a group of people, and I said, "Hey guys or gals, remember we heard this. Now this is why we're doing that thing." So connect it back to something. So for instance, in Seattle, we heard that we needed more staff training, and the team was adamant we need more staff training, but we never take the time off. Well, I said, okay, every quarter we're going to close the recreation centers for 3 hours, and we're going to do team training. So every quarter we close the recreation centers, and I said, thank you for this feedback. This is a direct result of the feedback you gave during my introductory meetings. And we did it for the three almost 4 years that I was there. Is we closed the rec centers and we had team meetings. Unfortunately, COVID happened, but even during COVID, we made a priority to communicate and to be together as a team, because that's what I heard consistently from the team, is we need better communication. So make sure you write down your top 3 priorities. Next, who matters, right? Who matters? So leadership happens through people, not organizational charts. So keep that in mind. Leadership happens through people, right? You as a leader, you have to inspire, you have to encourage, you have to cajole, you have to influence, right? And you need to understand who has influence, who influences success in your organization. Maybe even map out, this person has these skills and traits, this person has these skills and traits. And, one time I even put together a web of kind of accountability, like who are the people that I'm accountable for and what are they looking for from me as a leader? So I kind of had me in the center there, and I drew out all these little tentacles and wrote notes as to, what was important to each of those people. And it really helped me understand how hard my job was. And then 2, it helped me understand, where are the points of intersection, right? What could I do that would check the box for 2 or 3 people, right? How could I get the most bang for the buck that I was spending of my time? Also, think about who needs your trust and who already trusts you. And who already trusts you is likely going to be those people that were on the hiring committee and your immediate supervisor, right? This is the person that brought you in, said, "You're my guy, you're my gal, you're my person for this job," right? That person will likely have trust, but you'll need to continue to earn it, right? You don't want to break their trust. So you need to keep them informed, but you need to think about who needs your trust and whose trust do you need in the organization, both internal, external, on the executive team or the leadership team you're sitting with, the frontline staff. You also got to think about labor unions. I know in the South in Atlanta, we didn't have labor unions, but we had labor unions in name, but not necessarily, we didn't have a collective bargaining agreement. But in Seattle, we had 3 labor unions that we worked with. In Colorado, we didn't have labor unions. And in Seaside, we were too small. But labor unions are a critical partner. So you need to make sure you build trust with them. Volunteers, councils, board of commissions, the media, they're another partner that matters in this process. So meet with stakeholders before you need something from them. That's a real practical tip there. Make sure you meet with people before you're asking for them. I'm starting another business venture as well. And I was told sometimes it's easier to borrow a tractor after you get to know people, right? And it's really important that you get to know people first before you have to ask them for a favor. And remember that trust compounds. So it's really important that you build those relationships. One of the things in Atlanta, I built a great relationship with Michael Halicki with Park Pride, and that paid dividends for the 4 years that I was there. We were constantly meeting with each other. We met every other week. We built that relationship. We would talk, give each other feedback, watch each other's backs, but that trust lasted my whole tenure. And even today, we still call and encourage each other. And it's really important that you build trust before you need something. Well, I see we're at about the 2:30 mark here. So now it's time again to hear from our sponsors.
In today's parks and recreation industry, communication, safety, and efficiency go hand in hand. That's where Outdoor Link comes in. delivering smart technology that empowers city departments and community planners to do more, smarter. Outdoor Link's platform connects and automates everything that keeps your parks running smoothly. From lighting and locks to signage, water features, Wi-Fi, and digital advertising. Control and schedule park lights for safety and energy savings. Remotely manage facility access. Coordinate fountains and splash pads. Provide public connectivity. All from one simple, unified platform, giving you real-time control, data, and cost efficiency. For parks and recreation agencies, that means safer spaces, smarter resource use, faster responses, and stronger community engagement. And behind every great park story is great infrastructure. That's why Outdoor Link proudly supports DPRS Media Company, helping the Daily Parks and Rec Show amplify the voices of professionals shaping our communities every day. Outdoor Link, smart, connected solutions for parks, recreation, and beyond.
They say it's just rec. Just rec, where kids learn to try again. Just rec, where confidence begins. Where teamwork, effort, and fun matter more than trophies. It's not about perfection. It's about participation. It's not just rec. It's where kids learn to love the game and themselves. It's just rec until they learn teamwork for life. It's just rec, but it's everything to them. It's more than rec. It's a movement. It's just rec until you realize it's shaping the next generation. Together, we're not just running programs. We're building a culture of confidence, connection, and community. Join us.
Well, we're back. Practical Leadership here. I'm your host, Justin Cutler. Thank you for joining us for episode 2. You may have heard during the first episode, the kickoff episode, that just the number of job transitions that I had. And so today we're talking about episode 2 are all about job transitions. How do you manage them? How do you support yourself? How do you support your team? What questions to ask your team? And how do you get a step ahead to be the best leader you can be when you're leading through transition? So right now we're talking about question number 3 of our 5 questions, kind of to dive in here. Again, the 5 questions are: what is going on? What matters most? Who matters? What will success look like? And how will I lead? And right now we're on question number 3. Let's continue with that, which is who matters. And so again, we're talking about neighborhood groups. We're talking about the media, boards, community members, external partners, volunteers. Those are the groups that matter, that you need to understand what are their specific needs and how has the person prior to you met those needs, and how do you want to either reposition those relationships going forward, or how do you want to change that now in the present? There's a opportunity to reset that with a new leader, and you don't want to miss that opportunity, but you need to be asking the right questions. So you need to meet with stakeholders before you need something. You need to build that trust. And I was sharing how in Atlanta, I met with Michael Halicki. He was on the hiring committee, which helped us have a great relationship and just build that trust immediately. Also, when I was in Seaside, Oregon, I had a great opportunity to work with Mary Blake. And she was somebody that I would meet every night with after kind of the day had done. And we talk about what I observed, kind of get her thoughts. She would give me any feedback kind of about the day. And that was really helpful as a leader to have that kind of firsthand experience and firsthand feedback as I was working in Seaside. Not everybody's going to have that opportunity, but if you do have that opportunity to work with your predecessor, definitely take advantage of that because it can help build those relationships. Now, it also can be difficult too, right? You know, Mary and I were 2 different people. We had different world perspectives about how we thought things should work. But it was really helpful to understand but it was really also really helpful to understand and get that feedback in real time, so I could be the best leader and understand what was the direction that I needed and wanted to go. And so it's really important to understand, who matters within your organization. So question 4, what will success look like? And success is often assumed, right? But rarely defined. And so it can be difficult to understand, when you're thinking about your next steps within your organization, what does success look like, which is really important. So you want to define that with your supervisor. You want to define that with the mayor's office. You want to define that with the community. And they all may have different perspectives. And then, so once you define success, you need to look at what is that through line? Is it budget? Is it staff? Is it personnel? Is it maintenance? Is it recreation services? Is it golf? Is it fee for services? What is that critical element that you need to be, what is that common thread that you need to be pulling on in order to get the success for the most people? But then also think about it from an equity standpoint. There's groups out there that won't have the ability to advocate for themselves, but that they need to be served. One example of this was in Colorado. I understood that, Westminster is roughly a fairly affluent community. However, there is parts of our community that really struggled financially, and they needed additional support. And so we created a free lunch program because it was the right thing to do, because we knew that there were kids that were going hungry, and we needed to provide that in our community. And so we worked with the USDA, we worked with the school district, and we built a relationship that benefited the school district because they got compensated for providing these meals, and it benefited our community because the kids got fed in our parks and recreation spaces, and all of our kids got free lunch whenever they came to summer camp. And this became a need because I was out at a summer camp. I was taking some kids to Water World with our campers. And one of the kids he said, "Hey, I got to go buy my lunch from the vending machine." So he went and spent $5 in the vending machine. And I said, well, I know we have healthy vending, so that was a good thing. We changed our vending machines too. But, it really brought home just the need and the lack of food security for a lot of families, or just the time it takes to prepare a meal sometimes. And so it was really critical that we provided those free meals. Now that didn't come up in any interview, but it came up when you spent time out seeing and kind of observing what was going on. And I think free meals and free summer meals is something critical that Parks and Recreation does for so many communities across America that people just don't even think about. But we feed so many kids day in and day out that I think that is a real benchmark of success, is how are you treating the people in your community that can't advocate for themselves? And that's really a personal mark of success when I think about leadership. But you have to define, what does leadership look like, or what does success look like in your community? So again, if we sat down 1 year from today, what would convince you that this was a successful year, right? You'll likely hear different answers from different people. And that's where leadership begins, as you connect to implement and build those shared expectations, and then build towards accountability. Because without that, right, without shared expectations, accountability becomes impossible. And one of the things that I did after I asked a bunch of people questions and kind of heard from a team in Atlanta, and I got this idea from Christopher Williams in Seattle, is I sent out a letter that basically said, here are my expectations. And first I sent it to the deputy commissioners at the time, kind of my direct reports. And I said, here are my expectations for each of you. You're acting on my behalf, you're leading, you're an example for the team. Here are my minimum expectations from you. But then we took it a step further and we got the leadership team together and we said, what are our team expectations? What are we going to agree to as a team? And it started a really good conversation about, what do we want to be known for as a team? How do we want to operate? How do we want to lead? And it really helped us kind of winnow down our core values as a team about, working together. And then those leaders, I didn't say go do this, but those leaders then took that and met it with their teams and talked about these expectations with their teams and built those relationships and had deeper conversations about what is expectations, what do we need to be doing, what do we need to be working on. And it really helped to evolve the culture and really support success in the first couple of years and then set us up for the future. So, even be willing to put it down in writing. What are we agreeing to as a team, as a new leader? What do we want to accomplish? What do we want to work on? How do we want to work together? And sometimes it's that, how do we want to work together, that's important. And oftentimes teams don't talk about that. Question 5, last question here. How will I lead? Leadership isn't just what you accomplish, right? It's how people experience your leadership. So what type of character do you have? What type of presence? One of the critical things that I always prided myself on, or I felt with a really strong value, was showing up for my team. So that meant, showing up on Saturday morning to watch soccer, or showing up Saturday morning to throw out the first pitch for the softball program. That meant attending a couple basketball games, even if they were late at night. We had midnight basketball in Atlanta, and just being present, talking with community members, building those relationships. Oftentimes I would talk with vendors that were there, and we would get to know a lot of people, and just build those relationships. And it was really helpful to be present. And so, during your first 90 days, have a conversation with your family. If you have a family, it may be difficult making this leadership transition, but say, hey, and I had to have that conversation. Hey, I'm starting a new job. I need to be really present at my work, because it's important that I meet lots of people. We're going to be attending a lot of, events and activities together as a family, and we're going to be doing this together. Right. And so build that expectation with yourself and build that expectation with your family, but know that you want to, it'll be really intense in the beginning because you need to meet people. But then after you meet and build those relationships, and after you have that trust, then it can relax a little bit. But you also have to be careful too, because sometimes you set that expectation that you're going to be everywhere and attending anything, and then people just expect you to be everywhere, and you have to be careful, right? You don't want to burn yourself out. So it's kind of a both and. You'll find what works for you. But for me, I wanted to be present. I wanted to see what was going on. I wanted the team to know that I had their back, and then they would have my back in a sense, right? And so it was important to be present. But it's challenging, right? It's challenging. I have 2 kids, and they're great, and I have a wife, and I want to be present for them as well. And so, that sense of presence can be difficult. So make sure you have that conversation ahead of time with your loved ones as well. Because last thing you want to do is you don't want to be clear as far as what's going on and what everybody's working on. And then be consistent. Be consistent with your encouragement. Be consistent with your team. When there's a crisis, right? People will come to you, and sometimes they'll bring you bad news just to check what kind of person you are, right? See how you respond. And I always wanted to have a presence of response versus reacting, right? And reacting is when you kind of act from a point of emotion, or act from a point of kind of habit, right? But a response is something that you take in the information, you consider it, and then you make an action. But people are going to be testing you with bad news, and they'll bring you things that they won't bring you later, just to see if you kind of where are your boundaries, right? And so if in the beginning, if you're constantly taking on work that should be delegated, then they're going to keep coming back to you. So I would often ask the question, tell me more about this project. Why is it important that I'm engaged in this work? Like, what is critical about this that needs my perspective, right? Tell me, how would you address this issue? I would always kind of kick it back to the team member who's bringing me something and say, hey, what are your thoughts, right? I'd like your opinion as to how you would approach it. And if it was a good opinion, I'd say, great, sounds great. If it was something that I wouldn't do, or I might caution them, I'd give them feedback, obviously. But you build those habits early, and that will pay dividends later as you work within your organization. So how do you respond to bad news? People will be watching that. Your availability, right? Do you have an open door policy, or is your door constantly closed? I always had an open door policy. People would come and talk with me. I would give out my personal cell phone number. I always told people, look, here's my number. You can call me. I may not answer, but you can call me. And if I didn't know the number, I'd often let it go to voicemail. But people felt connected to me because they had that number. They know that they could call me. And if there was an emergency, typically I'd call them right back. If it wasn't an emergency, I'd usually call them right back. But if it was something that could wait, I may call them a couple hours later, depending on the urgency. But availability is critical. And your habits become the culture, right? They become the culture of the organization. So be aware of that. How do you handle criticism, right? You're going to be in a situation where you may be at a public meeting in Parks and Recreation, and somebody may criticize you, again, for nothing that you did, right? Nothing that you did, but something that maybe your predecessor said or did, or somebody said, hey, your predecessor committed to this. Where's my this, right? Like, I think in a situation I can remember where somebody's like, yeah, your predecessor said they'd be building me a skate park. Where's my skate park? And so, I'd go back, ask the team, kind of get clarity as to what what exactly was said and how often that was committed. And then we'd go back out and we'd kind of give an official response. But I would hesitate in giving an immediate response in a public meeting to something that you just don't know about, right? And I didn't know about it. And so either I would look to the team to answer that question, or I would defer to a later date in which I could actually fully answer that question, because it's critical that you give accurate information, not a quick response. But people want that quick response. But your job is to not feed that beast. Also, thinking about how you treat seasonal staff and maintenance staff, sometimes there can be a challenge. Like, let's be honest, in Parks and Recreation, oftentimes you either come up on the recreation side and you become a director, or you come up on the maintenance side and you become a director, and you're going to be criticized for not having recreation experience, or you're going to be considered criticized for not having park experience or golf experience or aquatic experience or nature experience. There is so much that we do as Parks and Recreation that's going to open yourself to criticism by one group or the other of, you don't know me, right? And if, let's say for me, I grew up on the recreation side. And so I was really intentional when I was hired in Atlanta. I was director of recreation in Seattle, and then I became the commissioner in Atlanta, Georgia. But I was very intentional about spending, a significant amount of time with the park maintenance staff in the beginning, because I knew that there would be that challenge, right? That temptation just to dive right in with recreation and something that I knew, something that was comfortable. And so I was intentional about spending a significant amount of my time with park maintenance. And also park maintenance was a big issue. And it needed a lot of attention, in the sense of we needed more resources for park maintenance. And that's what the community was clamoring about, is you need more money for park maintenance. And so that made it easy as well. But think about, where are you spending your time? If you're coming up on the park side, how are you getting to know the recreation side? If you're coming up on the planning side, I was talking to a leader the other day, and they came up on the park planning side, and they're a great leader, does a phenomenal job, but the team didn't know them, right? They didn't have that relationship. Well, you're an internal candidate, but you work in park planning. I don't know who you are, right? And so think about how in those situations you're going to differentiate yourself. And let's talk about that now. So I was going to talk about this towards the end, which we're getting there, but even if you're in the organization and you're an internal candidate that's promoted, it is still important that you take these steps, right? People are going to assume that you're kind of that same leader, but it is important that you still ask these questions. What's working well? What can be improved upon? What do you hope I do? What are you concerned I do? And what advice do you have for me? Even if you've been in with an organization for 20 years and you're coming into this new role, it may be easy, but there's going to be a lot of things that you're dealing with that people were shielding you from, or maybe kind of protecting you from, depending on your organization. But you still need to ask these 5 questions to reposition yourself within that relationship, right? You need to reset that dynamic, reset that relationship. So even if you're coming from an internal candidate, ask yourself these questions. How will I lead? You have an opportunity to change your relationship with the people in your organization on some level, right? Not like a full reset, but think about how you'll lead. How do you want to be different? How do you want to level up? How do you want to improve 1% every day? And then how do you conduct meetings? How quickly will you return phone calls? What behaviors will you reward? What's your leadership brand? And how does that develop long before your vision statements? And so when you think about this, what do you hope people say about your leadership 5 years from now? What do you hope people say about your leadership 5 years from now? That's a really critical question that you ask yourself, when you're coming into an organization or you've been there for a while and you're resetting your relationship and kind of resetting your role. It's really important that you ask yourself, where do you want to be known for in 5 years? And so, there's a lot of different things kind of out there about, your first 90 days, your first 100 days. And so we'll talk more about that in the future. But you really want to also think about, securing early wins, right? How are you building credibility? How are you increasing trust? Demonstrate your competence. So one of the things that I talked about with my supervisor and all of these different roles was, how can I increase trust? How can I build credibility? What are the quick things that you want me to accomplish? And if you have a good supervisor, they're going to be thinking about these things too. They're going to be saying, here is something I want you to do immediately. And I know that this will be a quick win for you. They'll be thinking and anticipating that you need quick wins as well. But before you enter an organization, be thinking about, how can I secure early wins? Maybe it's just meeting with everybody. That's a quick win. Maybe it's building relationships that haven't been built before. Maybe it's, don't choose flashy victories, right? Choose meaningful ones. When you hear from staff, and let's say you're out interviewing staff and you're asking what can be improved, and they're like, we need a new refrigerator. Go get the new refrigerator, right? Just do it. Put it on your credit card or understand what the reimbursement policies are, but get the new refrigerator. That will go a long way to be meaningful, to choose something meaningful, right? That means something to that team member. And it's something that you can do pretty easily. So think about those things. Also, build your learning agenda. Don't assume, create intentional questions, learn the process, the people, politics, the culture, and customs, right? Constantly thinking about how you're going to learn as you enter the organization. Excuse me. And continue to think about, the common transition mistakes that can hurt, that can impact your success. Don't try to impress, instead of learn. Change everything too quickly. Again, another pitfall. Avoid difficult conversations. You want to make sure that you're not avoiding difficult conversations, because the things that you allow are the things that are going to create your culture. And also, you want to avoid listening only to your leadership team. So there's going to be a temptation, right? You're going to get busy. You're going to have to do a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of emails, I'm sure, in any organization. And there's going to be a temptation only to listen to those closely around you. So you have to make sure that you're getting out of that inner circle. Also, ignoring informal leaders. There's a lot of people that are going to be in your organization. I can remember somebody in each organization that I've worked in. They didn't have maybe a high position in the organization, but they knew the pulse of what was going on, and they made sure that they were kind of at the center of everything, and that they have a lot of influence. So don't ignore those individuals. Make sure that you're encouraging and just understanding what they're hearing, because that will make a big difference and pay dividends in the long run. Also, don't confuse confidence with certainty, right? So you want to make sure that you are building those relationships. You don't know it all. You're new to an organization. You need to ask questions. That is your job. For the first 90 days, ask lots of questions. And sometimes people will even take a year to ask questions. In my opinion, I think a year is a little too long. I think there are things that can get done. Something that we got done in Atlanta is within the first 9 months, we raised our budget by 30%. We raised our budget by 30% in the first 9 months. Now we are 2 years out from election. There's a lot of opportunity there, but sometimes the window is open and you have to walk through it in order to get it done. So don't be afraid to walk through something that is blatantly staring you in the face and calling at you. Don't say, well, I said I wouldn't change anything for a year. No. If there is an opportunity to get a big win, you go get it. Just get it, right? But make sure you're certain. And even in those 9 months, there was a tremendous amount of research that we did. We worked with consultants to understand the maintenance needs. We asked a lot of questions of the city council. We asked a lot of questions of the mayor's office. We asked a lot of questions of our stakeholder groups. We had to activate an advocacy group. It's not recommended, but given the stars were in alignment, we were able to get something big done. Me and my team were able to get something big done within those first 9 months. But it was only because the stars were aligned. It was only because I was asking those questions. If you don't ask those questions, you aren't going to know where those opportunities are. And I think that's the really important thing. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do, in closing is, keep a transition journal, right? Answer these questions every week. What am I learning? Who have I met? What surprised me? What assumptions have changed? You're going to have some assumptions, maybe write them down. What deserves my attention next? Where am I building trust? And what decisions should wait? So that again, keep a transition journal and answer these questions weekly. What am I learning? Who have I met? What surprised me? What assumptions changed? What deserves my attention next? Where am I building trust? And what decisions should wait? And that'll be really helpful, right? You'll be able to write it down. Maybe even you can give a presentation. I give a presentation on much of this information at the National Recreation Parks Association, talking about leadership transitions. And this journal will be helpful for you. So as you go through, your next year, you'll be able to reflect on that journal. And then you'll be able to point back in staff meetings and say, hey, I heard this during this meeting, and this is why we're doing this thing. And it's really helpful. I've used that in multiple organizations to say, this is what I heard from this community, or this is what I heard from this team, and this is why we're doing this activity. One, it shows people that you were listening. Two, it honors their feedback. And three, it builds trust because you're following through on the commitments that you made. So be thinking about that. So the people who hired you already believe you're capable. Your job during a transition isn't to prove you're the smartest person in the room. It's to become the leader who understands the room well enough to help everyone move forward. So let me say that again. The people who hired you already believe you're capable, right? Your job during a transition isn't to prove you're the smartest person in the room. It's to become the leader who understands the room well enough to help everyone move forward. This week, I want you to spend 1 hour asking questions instead of giving answers, no matter where you're at. Maybe you just started. Maybe you've been in your organization for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases, or even 5, right? This week, spend 1 hour asking questions instead of giving answers. And I would love to hear, comments on Facebook or LinkedIn. I would love to hear from each of you. What did you learn this week asking more questions? And you may discover the solution was already in the organization. You just hadn't heard it yet. Well, that about concludes our show. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Justin Cutler, and this is Practical Leadership. Next week's topic, we will be developing your 30, 60, and 90-day plan and talking about one-on-one meetings. I'm sure you have them now. If you're working in Parks and Recreation, you probably meet with your team or work with team members. You might meet weekly, you might meet daily, you might meet every other week, you might meet once a month. But we'll talk about best practices for one-on-one meetings, and we'll help you develop a 30, 60, and 90-day plan to get you on your right foot. And with also, just as a reminder, make sure you're going online, you're liking and subscribing on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. It helps us build our show and helps us build our reach to get to more people more frequently. So please go online to YouTube and like and subscribe. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, because once we hit that 1,000 subscribers, we can be live on YouTube as well and get to more people. So please go online and do that today. And always be sure to check out the Daily Parks and Recreation show tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, with our very own, the doorman, Craig LeBlanc. And with that, thank you for joining Practical Leadership. My name is Justin Cutler, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
This episode is brought to you by SDSU's Sports MBA program. If you're passionate about sports and want to work in the women's sports industry, then this is the time to pay attention. SDSU's program is 12 months accelerated hands-on learning where students have actually gotten to work with teams like the San Diego Mojo, partnered with the Farmers Insurance Open, and visited headquarters like the Upper Deck or Callaway Golf. It's built for people who want to be in rooms like that. So if you're interested, deadlines are approaching. Learn more or apply with the links in the description.
In the parks and recreation industry, attention is limited, but influence is everything. Every day, thousands of parks and recreation professionals make critical decisions. Decisions on infrastructure, programs, technology, and vendors. The question is your brand part of that conversation? DPRS Media Network was built to answer that question. We are a dedicated media ecosystem focused exclusively on the parks and recreation industry in the United States. Through a network of daily and weekly shows, we inform, connect, and influence this audience. Our distribution spans multiple platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, X, Instagram, plus email campaigns, newsletters, podcasts, and live event coverage. This is not a single-channel strategy. It is a multi-platform media engine. Today, our network reaches over 214,000 connections, including 51,000 on LinkedIn, 64,000 on Facebook, nearly 40,000 email subscribers, and thousands more across podcast and social platforms. While some audiences overlap, our true value is not just reach, it is relevance. We speak directly to parks and recreation directors, program managers, and industry leaders. an audience that is highly targeted and actively engaged. Through DPRS Media Network, your brand integrates seamlessly into this ecosystem. Through sponsored show segments, targeted advertisement placements, podcast features, and host-read promotions, even custom-branded content. Not as interruptions, but as part of the conversation. And we don't just operate online. We attend over 15 major parks and recreation conventions each year, reaching more than 24,000 professionals in person. Through live shows, interviews, and on-site media coverage, we position our partners at the center of the industry. Every piece of content we produce is amplified across our entire network. Multiple shows, multiple hosts, multiple platforms. Your message doesn't appear once, it multiplies. This is more than advertising. It is strategic positioning within a trusted media network built specifically for the parks and recreation industry. If your goal is to reach decision makers, build credibility, and stay top of mind, then it's time to partner with DPRS Media Network. Apply for partnership or sponsorship today. Let's position your brand where the industry is already paying attention.